A pregnant mom with nowhere left to go stumbles upon an abandoned farmhouse deep in the woods. She believes it's nothing more than a safe place to spend the night with her children. But hidden inside that forgotten house is a secret no one has uncovered for over 70 years. What she discovers will change her family's future forever and reveal a truth that was never meant to be found. Stay until the end, because the final discovery inside this abandoned farmhouse is something you'll never forget. Deep in the forgotten woods, where golden rays of sunlight filtered through towering ancient trees, Grace Bennett stood silently before a weathered farmhouse. Her 3 children gathered close beside her, Olivia, Ethan, and Lucy. Only 2 weeks ago, Grace had been a respected office manager with a steady paycheck and a predictable life. Today, she was unemployed, homeless, and struggling to hold her family together. The abandoned farmhouse, its windows clouded by decades of dust, seemed almost as though it had been waiting for her. Inside, thick cobwebs hung from the ceiling beams, while every floorboard groaned beneath her cautious footsteps. Yet it wasn't the silence that caught her attention. It was an old wooden trunk resting quietly beneath a faded blanket in the far corner of the room. What secrets had been hidden inside this forgotten home? And could those secrets possibly change the destiny of a family that had already lost almost everything? 2 weeks earlier, Grace Bennett sat frozen at her office desk, the termination letter trembling in her hands. 12 years of loyalty had ended with a corporate restructuring and a meeting that lasted less than 2 minutes. "I'm sorry, Grace," her supervisor said softly, avoiding eye contact. "The decision came from headquarters. You'll receive 2 weeks of severance pay." That night, Grace lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her apartment while her children slept peacefully in the next room. She calculated every dollar she had left. The severance would barely cover another month's rent. There was no savings account. Every extra dollar had already been spent on Olivia's braces and Ethan's asthma treatments the year before. Finding another office management position in their small town had become nearly impossible. Dozens of experienced employees had lost their jobs during the same round of layoffs. The following morning, 16-year-old Olivia Bennett found her mother sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by job listings and rejection letters. "We'll be okay." "Mom," Olivia whispered, gently squeezing Grace's hand before quietly preparing breakfast for her younger brother and sister. 11-year-old Ethan Bennett hurried into the kitchen, full of the same endless energy he carried every day. "Mom, can I use the cardboard boxes from the recycling bin for my school project?" "Of course, sweetheart," Grace answered with a tired smile. A moment later, little Lucy Bennett, only 8 years old, shuffled into the room, clutching her worn, stuffed rabbit. "Did you find a new job yet?" Her innocent question broke Grace's heart. "Not yet, sweetheart," Grace replied softly. "But I promise I won't stop trying." The next 2 weeks disappeared beneath an endless cycle of applications, interviews, and rejection emails. Then came the eviction notice. 3 days. That was all they had left. Grace sold nearly everything they owned. The furniture, the television, most of the electronics, even many of her own clothes. She kept only what could fit inside their aging sedan clothes, important documents, family photographs, and the precious keepsakes that meant more than money. Olivia packed her belongings without complaining, though the redness around her eyes revealed tears she refused to let anyone see. Ethan tried to convince everyone it was an adventure. Lucy cried when she realized she had to leave her bedroom behind forever. "Where are we going now?" Olivia asked quietly, as the apartment building disappeared in the rear-view mirror. Grace tightened her grip on the steering wheel. "My grandmother once owned a small farmhouse near Maple Ridge," she said. "It may not even be standing anymore, but there are campgrounds nearby. We'll figure something out." As they drove farther into the countryside, the roads became narrower. Cell phone service slowly disappeared. Then, without warning, The old sedan sputtered violently before rolling to a stop beside a lonely dirt road. Grace sighed as she opened the hood. She knew nothing about repairing engines. The nearest town was still miles away. "Mom," Ethan called, pointing toward a narrow trail disappearing into the woods. "Maybe it leads to someone's house." "Maybe they have a phone," Olivia added hopefully. With no better choice, Grace nodded. "Stay together. Lucy, hold Ethan's hand." The narrow path twisted through dense forest for nearly a mile before opening into a quiet clearing. There stood an old farmhouse, almost completely hidden beneath climbing vines and overgrown brush. Its porch sagged with age. Its windows were gray with dust. Yet somehow, despite years of abandonment, the roof still appeared strong. "Mom, we can't just walk in," Olivia whispered. Grace carefully reached for the doorknob. "We're not breaking in," she answered gently. "We're only asking this place for shelter until morning." The old wooden door slowly creaked open. Dust drifted through beams of afternoon sunlight. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall. An old cast-iron stove stood inside the tiny kitchen. A worn wooden table rested quietly in the center of the room beside 3 weathered chairs. A narrow staircase disappeared into the loft above. "It's like something from an old storybook," Lucy whispered. "It's probably full of spiders," Ethan said with excitement rather than fear. Grace brushed years of dust from the fireplace mantel. "No one's lived here for a very long time," she murmured. "But the house is still standing." Together they spent the rest of the afternoon sweeping away decades of dust, clearing cobwebs, and making the farmhouse livable for just one night. Grace found several old blankets inside a cedar chest. After shaking them outside, they became makeshift bedding. That evening, the family gathered together on the wooden floor beside the cold fireplace, using folded jackets as pillows. The children fell asleep almost immediately. Grace remained awake, watching them, listening to the silence, trying not to let fear consume her. For the first time in her life, she had no answers, no job, no home, no idea what tomorrow would bring. Then, in the faint glow of a single candle, something caught her eye. In the far corner of the room, partially hidden beneath a faded blanket, the corner of an old wooden trunk quietly waited in the darkness. Too exhausted to investigate, Grace promised herself she would look inside after sunrise. For now, she quietly wiped away a few tears, blew out the candle, and lay down beside the 3 people who depended on her more than anyone else in the world. The first rays of morning sunlight slipped through the dusty windows, gently warming the silent farmhouse. Grace Bennett opened her eyes slowly, momentarily forgetting where she was. Then reality returned all at once. She was unemployed, homeless, and responsible for 3 children who depended entirely on her. Beside her, Olivia, Ethan, and Lucy still slept peacefully beneath the old blankets they had found the night before. Grace envied how easily children could find comfort, even in the middle of uncertainty. Trying not to wake them, she quietly stood and stretched her aching back. Her eyes drifted towards the far corner of the room. The old wooden trunk. It had been on her mind all night. Moving carefully across the creaking floorboards, she knelt beside it. The trunk was beautifully crafted despite its age. Thick leather straps reinforced its corners, while a tarnished brass lock still guarded whatever had been hidden inside for decades. Grace gently lifted the lid. Locked. Just as she expected? "What do you think is inside?" Ethan's sleepy voice startled her. She smiled as her son rubbed his eyes and walked over. "I honestly don't know," Grace admitted. "But whatever it is, it doesn't belong to us. Maybe there's a key somewhere. There might be, but we're not going to force it open." Ethan nodded, though curiosity sparkled in his eyes. Soon the rest of the family woke, and together they began discussing what needed to be done first. Water, Food, shelter, those came before mysteries. Fortunately, behind the farmhouse stood an old hand pump well. After several determined attempts, rusty water sputtered from the pipe before finally running crystal clear. Grace almost cried with relief. At least they wouldn't go thirsty. The family spent the morning cleaning. Olivia swept years of dust from the tiny kitchen. Ethan explored the loft, searching for anything useful. Lucy stayed close beside her mother, carefully brushing dirt from the old wooden floor with a broom almost as tall as she was. Suddenly, Lucy stopped. "Mom." Grace looked up. "What is it?" Lucy pointed toward the fireplace. Something small glimmered beneath layers of ash. Grace knelt and brushed away the dirt. It was an old brass key. Unlike ordinary keys, this one had an intricate pattern of carved leaves decorating its handle. "It's beautiful," Lucy whispered. Ethan hurried over. "Maybe that's the key." Grace turned it over in her hand. The size looked right. Still, a knot formed in her stomach. "This isn't our property," she said quietly. "We shouldn't be searching through someone else's private things." Olivia looked toward the forgotten trunk. "But nobody has lived here in years." "If we're staying here until the car is repaired," she continued gently, "maybe understanding who owned this place could help us find their family." Grace remained silent. Her conscience wrestled with necessity. She had always taught her children to respect other people's belongings. But circumstances had changed. This farmhouse had become the only roof protecting them from the cold. Perhaps discovering its history was the respectful thing to do. Taking a slow breath, she walked back towards the trunk. The brass key slid smoothly into the old lock. Click. The sound echoed through the silent room. For a moment, no one moved. Then Grace slowly lifted the lid. Inside, everything had been carefully wrapped beneath a layer of oilcloth that had somehow protected its contents from moisture. Several leather-bound journals rested neatly beside folded maps. A weathered property deed, old photographs, bundles of handwritten letters tied together with faded blue ribbon. "Wow," Ethan whispered. Grace carefully lifted the top journal. Written neatly across the first page were 4 simple words. "Property of Evelyn Harper." She slowly opened the book. The first entry was dated April 12th, 1952. "The farmhouse is older than I remembered from childhood, but these walls belong to no one except me. After 15 years of living inside a marriage that slowly erased who I was, I finally found the courage to leave. Richard will be furious when he realizes I've disappeared. He always believed this land was worthless. Perhaps that's exactly why it became my sanctuary." The room fell completely silent. Olivia read over her mother's shoulder. "She lived here alone." Grace nodded slowly. "It sounds like she came here to escape someone." Lucy gently touched one of the journals. "I think she was lonely." Grace swallowed hard. She understood that feeling better than she wanted to admit. Setting the journal aside, she unfolded the brittle property deed. The document showed that the farmhouse and hundreds of surrounding acres had originally belonged to Samuel Harper, Evelyn's grandfather. "Do you think the Harper family still lives around here?" Olivia asked. "I don't know." Grace carefully folded the deed again. "But I think we need to find out." Meanwhile, Ethan had picked up another journal. His eyes widened. "Listen to this." He cleared his throat dramatically. "I have hidden my greatest treasure where only those with honest hearts will discover it. Let the forest guard my secrets until they are needed once again." Lucy gasped. "A treasure?" Ethan grinned. "Maybe gold." Grace smiled faintly. "Or maybe something far more valuable." Although she tried to sound practical, deep inside, she couldn't shake the strange feeling that opening this old trunk had done far more than reveal someone's forgotten memories. Somehow, it felt as though the farmhouse itself had been waiting for them to arrive. That evening, the farmhouse felt different. Not warmer because of a fire, they still had very little wood to burn. Not brighter because of the fading sunlight. different in a way Grace couldn't explain. Almost welcoming. After dinner, made from the last cans of soup and a few slices of stale bread, Olivia and Ethan climbed into the loft to prepare their sleeping area. Lucy curled up beside the fireplace, quietly drawing flowers on the back of an old grocery receipt. Grace remained at the kitchen table. The journals lay neatly stacked before her. She opened the second volume. The pages carried the scent of old paper and cedar wood. The next entry was dated May 3rd, 1952. The first weeks have tested every ounce of my strength. My hands, once soft from years of office work and comfortable living, are now rough and blistered. I've learned to chop wood, repair broken windows, carry water from the well, and grow my own vegetables. Richard always believed I was too fragile to survive on my own. Every sunrise proves him wrong. Grace slowly looked down at her own hands. Only a few weeks earlier they had typed reports, organized schedules, and answered office phones. Now they were stained with dirt, scratched by old nails, and sore from hauling water. For the first time since losing everything, she felt strangely connected to someone who had lived more than 70 years before. She continued reading. June 18th, 1952. I visited Maple Ridge today. The stairs followed me through every street. A woman living alone is always questioned. A woman who leaves her husband is judged even more harshly. But I no longer live for the approval of others. Grace paused. The words lingered in her heart. She knew exactly what it felt like to be judged. To lose a job. To lose a home. To feel invisible. She turned another page. Then another. Each journal entry revealed another piece of Evelyn Harper's remarkable transformation. The frightened woman who had first arrived at the farmhouse slowly became confident, independent, resourceful, hopeful. It was as though the farmhouse itself had healed her. Suddenly, a sentence near the bottom of one page made Grace sit upright. The Caldwell family built their fortune upon lies. She frowned. Another entry followed only a few weeks later. Grandfather's survey records proved the property boundaries were altered illegally. If these documents ever become public, everything Charles Caldwell stole will be exposed. Grace's heartbeat quickened. She turned the page. Another entry. Then another. Every journal seemed to mention the same family. The Caldwells. Their growing timber company. Their expanding land holdings. Their influence over the county. Ethan. Grace called quietly. Within seconds, her son climbed down the ladder. What is it? I think Evelyn wasn't hiding money. What do you mean? I think she was hiding evidence. Olivia joined them, reading the open journal over Grace's shoulder. Evidence against who? Grace pointed to the name. The Caldwell family. Olivia frowned. Why would someone hide documents instead of taking them to the police? Grace didn't answer immediately. Instead, she continued reading. Finally, she found another passage. The sheriff cannot be trusted. Neither can the county clerk. Too many people owe their loyalty to the Caldwells. The room fell silent. Lucy slowly walked over from the fireplace. Without saying a word, she rested one small hand on the journal. The lady isn't scared anymore, she whispered. Grace looked down at her daughter. What lady? Lucy blinked as though surprised by the question. The one who lives here. Olivia exchanged a worried glance with her mother. Lucy, Grace said gently. No one lives here anymore. Lucy shook her head. She isn't here like us. She's just... The little girl searched for the right words. Waiting. A cold breeze drifted through the farmhouse. None of the windows were open. Grace felt goosebumps rise across her arms. She quickly closed the journal. It's been a long day. We're all tired. The children nodded. Within minutes, they climbed into the loft and fell asleep. But Grace couldn't. The journals refused to leave her thoughts. Near midnight, she lit a single candle and opened another notebook. This one contained no daily entries. Instead, it held maps, property sketches, boundary lines, measurements. Small stars had been drawn across different locations surrounding the farmhouse. One star circled the house itself. 5 others stretched deep into the surrounding forest. Each location was marked with the same carved leaf symbol found on the brass key. Grace unfolded the final page. Written across the bottom in careful handwriting were words that sent a chill through her entire body. If you are reading this, then you have found my first secret. The truth was never buried. It was protected. Follow the markers. Trust only those who seek justice rather than wealth. The forest remembers everything. At that exact moment, a loud creak echoed across the front porch. Grace's heart nearly stopped. Someone, or something, was outside. She carefully blew out the candle. The farmhouse disappeared into darkness. Holding her breath, she stepped toward the dusty front window and peered through a narrow gap in the curtain. A lone figure stood at the edge of the porch. "Not moving!" Simply watching the house. The moonlight reflected faintly from the stranger's flashlight. After several long seconds, the figure turned quietly and disappeared back into the forest. Grace remained frozen beside the window. Whoever had been standing outside. They already knew someone had returned to the Harper farmhouse. And somehow, she couldn't shake the feeling that the search for Evelyn Harper's hidden truth had just become far more dangerous. Grace barely slept that night. Long after the mysterious visitor disappeared into the darkness, she remained awake, sitting beside the cold fireplace, with Evelyn Harper's journal resting in her lap. The farmhouse no longer felt like an abandoned shelter. It felt like a message. As dawn broke over the surrounding forest, birdsong replaced the uneasy silence. Grace quietly stepped onto the front porch, wrapping an old sweater tightly around herself as the cool mountain air filled her lungs. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't thinking about the eviction notice, or the unpaid bills, or the countless job applications that had gone unanswered. She was thinking about Evelyn, a woman who had once stood on this very porch with nothing but fear, determination, and hope. Couldn't sleep either. Grace turned to find Olivia carrying 2 steaming mugs of instant coffee. Grace smiled faintly. "I kept thinking about those journals." Olivia sat beside her. "Me too." After a long silence, she finally asked the question neither of them had wanted to say aloud. "Mom, do you think all of this happened for a reason?" Grace stared across the quiet clearing. A few days ago, she would have laughed at such an idea. "Now, score." She wasn't so sure. "I don't know," she admitted. "But somehow, I don't think finding this place was an accident." Later that morning, the family returned to cleaning the farmhouse. The work no longer felt like preparing a temporary shelter. Without realizing it, each of them had begun treating the old house as though it deserved to live again. Olivia carefully washed every dusty window until sunlight poured into the rooms. Ethan repaired a broken fence using scraps of weathered lumber he found behind the barn. Lucy gathered wildflowers from the edge of the woods and placed them inside old glass jars throughout the house. "It looks happier now," she said with a smile. Grace couldn't help smiling back. "It does." While sweeping beneath one of the kitchen cabinets, Grace noticed loose floorboards. Kneeling down, she carefully lifted one edge. Inside, she found nothing valuable, just a neatly folded piece of paper. The handwriting was instantly recognizable. It belonged to Evelyn. Grace unfolded the fragile note. "A home is not measured by its size. It is measured by the love that refuses to abandon it. If you care for this place, one day it will care for you." Grace quietly read the words again. Then once more, something inside her began to change. Until now, she had spent every day believing she was simply trying to survive. Now she realized survival wasn't enough. Her children needed something more than food and shelter. They needed hope. They needed a place that felt like home, even if that home was old, even if it had broken windows and creaking floors. That afternoon, they walked into Maple Ridge to buy a few groceries with the little money Grace had left. The small town seemed friendlier than it had during their first visit. People smiled. Several neighbors waved. An elderly woman sitting outside the bakery even handed Lucy a warm cinnamon roll. "For the little one," she said kindly. Grace thanked her, surprised by the generosity. Inside Whitaker General Store, Rose Whitaker greeted them with her usual warm smile. "Looks like the farmhouse is beginning to shine again." Grace laughed softly. "We're doing our best." Rose studied Grace for a moment before speaking. "You know, my father always said Evelyn believed houses remembered kindness." Grace looked up. "You knew her?" "I was just a little girl." Rose smiled at the memory. "But she was always helping people. She never had much, but somehow she always found something to give." Those words stayed with Grace all afternoon. As they walked back toward the farmhouse carrying bags of groceries, Ethan suddenly stopped beside the old wooden gate. "Mom?" Grace turned. "What is it?" "I don't want to leave." Grace looked at her son. "What do you mean?" "I know the car will probably get fixed. And maybe we'll have to go. But—" He glanced toward the farmhouse, standing quietly among the trees. "This place feels different. It feels safe." Olivia nodded. "I was thinking the same thing." Lucy smiled. "Evelyn said we belong here." Neither Grace nor Olivia corrected her this time. Instead, Grace simply looked at the old farmhouse. Only a few days earlier, it had been nothing more than an abandoned building hidden in the woods. Now it had become something entirely different. A place where her children laughed again. A place where they slept without fear. A place where strangers had shown unexpected kindness. A place where one woman's courage still echoed through every room. That evening, after dinner, Grace carefully placed Evelyn's journals back inside the trunk. She no longer saw them as forgotten memories. They were a legacy, a guide left behind by someone who understood exactly what it meant to lose everything. And still choose hope. Standing beside the fireplace, Grace quietly whispered to herself. We didn't come here by chance. For the first time since losing her job, she no longer felt like a victim of circumstances. She felt like someone who had been entrusted with a purpose. And somewhere beyond the farmhouse walls, hidden beneath decades of silence, the rest of Evelyn Harper's story was still waiting to be found. The following morning, Grace Bennett carefully folded Evelyn Harper's journals and placed them back inside the old trunk. She had spent nearly every free moment reading the remarkable story of a woman who had refused to surrender, no matter how overwhelming the odds. Now Grace found herself asking a question she hadn't considered before. What if Evelyn hadn't left these journals simply to tell her story? What if she had left them to begin someone else's? Later that morning, Grace drove the aging sedan barely running after Ethan managed a temporary repair into Maple Ridge. She hoped to find part-time work before the little money they had left disappeared completely. Olivia insisted on coming with her. I don't want you doing this alone, she said. Grace smiled. I guess I've raised a pretty stubborn daughter. You certainly have. The first stop was Whitaker General Store. As soon as Rose Whitaker saw Grace walk through the front door, she smiled warmly. I was hoping you'd stop by. Grace looked surprised. You were... Rose nodded. I've been thinking about you ever since we met. She glanced toward Olivia before lowering her voice. I need someone dependable to help around the store. Grace blinked. You mean a job? Part-time for now, Rose replied. But if things work out, it could become permanent. Grace felt tears gathering in her eyes. After weeks of rejection, someone was finally giving her a chance. I don't even know how to thank you. Rose smiled gently. You don't have to. My father always believed that when life gives you the opportunity to help someone... Oh, you help. Grace accepted the offer without hesitation. For the first time since losing everything, she would once again have an income. It wasn't much, but it was hope. As they finished discussing work schedules, the front door opened. A young man carrying a leather briefcase stepped inside. Rose smiled. Perfect timing. She turned toward Grace. "This is Daniel Brooks." "He grew up here. One of the finest young attorneys you'll ever meet." Daniel extended his hand politely. "I've heard you've been staying at the old Harper farmhouse." Grace nodded cautiously. "I hope that isn't a problem." "Actually," Daniel smiled, "it might become an opportunity." Grace frowned. "I don't understand." Daniel placed several folded property maps on the counter. The Harper farmhouse has been sitting in legal uncertainty for decades. Most people assume it belongs to Caldwell Timber Company. But assumption and ownership aren't always the same thing. Grace's heart skipped. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Daniel continued calmly, "that the farmhouse itself may never have been legally transferred." Grace stared at him in disbelief. "But Victor Caldwell said the land belongs to his company." "He says a great many things." Daniel smiled politely. "Whether he can prove them is another matter." He carefully unfolded an old county survey. The original property records disappeared years ago. But if Evelyn Harper kept copies, Grace immediately thought of the trunk, the journals, the deed, the maps. She slowly looked back at Daniel. "I found documents." His expression changed instantly. "What kind of documents?" "Original deeds. Old surveys? Personal journals?" Daniel's eyes widened. "Grace, those could be incredibly important." He lowered his voice. "If the original deeds still exist, Fortsum, they could completely change the ownership history of that property." Olivia looked from one adult to the other. "You mean—" "My mom could actually keep the farmhouse." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "It's possible, but only if we can prove the documents are authentic." Grace hardly dared breathe. For weeks, she had believed the farmhouse was nothing more than temporary shelter. Now, it might become something far greater. A real home. Not borrowed. Not rented. Not borrowed from someone's kindness. A place her family could finally call their own. Daniel reached into his briefcase and handed Grace a business card. "I'd like to examine every document you found. If everything checks out, I'll represent you." Grace looked at him in surprise. "We can't afford an attorney." Daniel smiled. "My grandfather once knew Evelyn Harper. He always believed she was trying to protect something important. If you've found what she left behind, I'd foin. Pomas. Then helping you isn't just legal work. It's finishing something that began a long time ago." As Grace and Olivia stepped outside the general store, neither spoke for several moments. The afternoon sun bathed Maple Ridge in warm golden light. For the first time since leaving their old apartment, the future no longer looked empty. Grace looked toward the distant mountains where the old farmhouse stood hidden among the trees. Only days earlier she had arrived there with nothing except fear and exhaustion. Now she had a job, an attorney willing to help, a growing sense of belonging, and perhaps, just perhaps, a chance to give her children something she thought they had lost forever. Not simply another place to live, but a place they could finally call home. The weeks that followed brought more than repairs to the old Harper farmhouse. They began rebuilding something far more important. Themselves. Every morning before sunrise, Grace Bennett left for her shift at Whitaker General Store, grateful for every hour of honest work. Though the pay was modest, it was enough to buy groceries, keep the lights on with a small generator, and slowly restore a sense of dignity she thought she had lost forever. When she returned each afternoon, her children were no longer waiting for instructions. They had become a team. Olivia naturally stepped into a leadership role. She kept track of the household expenses in a small notebook, planned meals from whatever ingredients they had, and organized every document Daniel Brooks requested for the legal case. Grace often caught herself smiling as she watched her daughter. Only weeks earlier, Olivia had carried the quiet fear of losing everything. Now she carried quiet confidence. One afternoon, Daniel arrived with copies of county records. "I've never seen someone your age organize legal evidence this well," he told Olivia. She smiled modestly. "I'm just helping my mom." Daniel shook his head. "No. You're helping protect your family's future." For the first time in months, Olivia looked genuinely proud of herself. Meanwhile, Ethan threw every ounce of his endless energy into restoring the property. He repaired broken fence posts, cleared fallen branches from the trails, built raised garden beds from reclaimed lumber. Even Sheriff Cooper, who occasionally drove by to check on the family, couldn't hide his admiration. "Looks like you've got yourself quite a young carpenter." Ethan grinned. "I'm learning. Mr. Harper built this place to last. I just want to help it keep standing." Grace quietly corrected him. "Evelyn Harper." Ethan smiled. "I know. But I think her grandfather would be proud too." Lucy changed in a different way. She remained the quietest member of the family. Yet her gentle spirit seemed to breathe new life into every room she entered. Fresh flowers appeared on windowsills every morning. Small drawings decorated empty shelves. She even convinced Grace to repaint the front door a cheerful shade of deep red after finding an old note in one of Evelyn's journals describing it as the color of welcome. Visitors to the farmhouse often commented on how peaceful the place felt. None of them could explain why. Neither could Grace. One Saturday afternoon, while cleaning the attic, Grace discovered an old rocking chair hidden beneath a dusty canvas. Its wood was scratched. One armrest had broken away, but the chair itself remained sturdy. As she gently brushed away decades of dust, her hand instinctively rested on her growing belly. She smiled. Only a few months remained before her baby would be born. For the first time since her husband's death, she wasn't overwhelmed by fear. Instead, she imagined rocking her newborn child in that very chair. The thought nearly brought tears to her eyes. Later that evening, the family gathered around the kitchen table after dinner. Daniel had stopped by with encouraging news. "The county has officially agreed to review the Harper property records." Grace looked at him carefully. "What does that mean?" "It means your case is finally being taken seriously." Victor Caldwell could no longer dismiss them as trespassers. The documents Evelyn had protected for decades were beginning to speak for themselves. After Daniel left, Grace walked outside onto the front porch. The setting sun painted the surrounding forest in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. Olivia joined her quietly. "You've changed," Olivia said. Grace looked over. "What makes you say that? When we lost our apartment, you spent every day apologizing. You kept saying you were sorry. You blamed yourself for everything." Grace lowered her eyes. "I did, but not anymore." Grace nodded slowly. "I finally realized something." "What?" "I wasn't the reason we lost everything. Life had simply taken a difficult turn. And," Grace smiled softly, "and that doesn't mean life is over. It simply means we're being asked to begin again." Olivia slipped her hand into her mother's. "I'm proud of you." Grace felt tears welling in her eyes. "No," she whispered. "I'm proud of us." She looked back toward the farmhouse. The old roof no longer looked abandoned. Warm light glowed through the clean windows. Laughter drifted outside as Ethan chased Lucy around the yard. For the first time in many months, it truly sounded like home. Grace rested one hand gently on her belly. The tiny baby kicked softly in response. She laughed through her tears. "I see that." Olivia smiled. "The baby agrees." Grace looked toward the mountains surrounding Maple Ridge. She had arrived believing she had lost her future. Instead, she had found her purpose, not simply to protect an old farmhouse, not simply to uncover Evelyn Harper's hidden truth, but to show her children and the little life growing inside her that even after heartbreak, loss, and unimaginable hardship, a family willing to stand together could build something stronger than they had ever imagined. And for the first time since everything had fallen apart, Grace no longer feared tomorrow. She was finally ready to welcome it. Winter arrived quietly in Maple Ridge. Fresh snow blanketed the old Harper farmhouse, transforming the weathered property into something that looked almost magical. Inside, however, life had never felt warmer. A fire crackled gently inside the restored stone fireplace, while the smell of homemade vegetable soup filled the kitchen. Grace Bennett smiled as she watched Ethan carry another log inside, Olivia carefully organizing Daniel Brooks's legal papers on the dining table, and Lucy decorating the windows with handmade paper snowflakes. Just a few months earlier, none of them had believed they would ever smile again. Then, one snowy afternoon, Daniel's pickup truck pulled into the driveway. Grace noticed the wide smile on his face before he even stepped out. She knew something had happened. As everyone gathered inside the farmhouse, Daniel removed a thick folder from his briefcase. "I've just come from the county courthouse." No one spoke. "The investigation is finished." Grace unconsciously placed one hand over her pregnant belly. What did they decide? Daniel looked around the room before smiling. The county officially ruled that the Harper farmhouse was never legally transferred to Caldwell Timber Company. Olivia covered her mouth. Ethan stared in disbelief. Lucy simply smiled, as though she had known all along. Daniel continued. "The original deeds Evelyn Harper protected all those years have been authenticated. The fraudulent land transfers carried out by Charles Caldwell have now been officially documented. The county has begun restoring ownership rights to several families." Grace felt tears filling her eyes. "And the farmhouse?" Daniel smiled. "According to Evelyn Harper's final legal instructions, the farmhouse is to become a protected family homestead for the people who preserved it." He looked directly at Grace. "That means it's yours." For several long seconds, Grace couldn't speak. She simply lowered her head and cried. Not tears of sadness, not tears of fear, but tears of overwhelming gratitude. After months of uncertainty, her children finally had something no one could take away. A home. Word spread quickly throughout Maple Ridge. Within days, neighbors began arriving one after another. Some brought lumber. Others brought furniture that had been carefully stored for years. Someone donated a dining table. Another family delivered handmade quilts. Rose Whitaker surprised Grace with a basket filled with homemade bread, preserves, and baby blankets she had sewn herself. "This house gave hope back to our town," Rose said gently. "Now it's our turn to help fill it with love." Even Sheriff Cooper stopped by carrying a rocking chair he had restored himself. "I figured every baby deserves a proper place to be rocked to sleep." Grace ran her fingers across the polished wood. It was the same chair she had discovered in the attic weeks earlier. Sheriff Cooper had secretly repaired it. "You didn't have to do this." He smiled. Sometimes kindness is simply passed from one generation to the next. A few weeks later, as the first light of dawn spread across the snowy mountains, Grace gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Olivia held her little sister first. Ethan stood proudly beside the bed, grinning from ear to ear. Lucy gently kissed the baby's tiny forehead. "What should we name her?" Olivia whispered. Grace looked toward the farmhouse window. Outside, snowflakes drifted peacefully through the morning air. Her eyes wandered to Evelyn Harper's journals resting safely on the bookshelf. Without Evelyn, none of this would have been possible. Grace smiled through happy tears. "I think her name should be Hope." The room fell silent. Daniel quietly wiped away a tear. Rose smiled warmly. "It fits perfectly, because that tiny child represented everything the family had almost lost, and everything they had found again." Months later, the Harper farmhouse officially reopened not only as Grace's home, but also as a small community center where struggling families could receive temporary shelter, meals, and legal guidance. Grace insisted on placing a simple wooden plaque beside the front door. It read, "This home stands because one woman refused to surrender, and another chose to believe." Visitors often stopped to read those words. Some smiled. Some cried. Many left inspired. On quiet evenings, Grace still sat on the front porch with baby Hope sleeping peacefully in her arms. She would watch Ethan working in the garden, Olivia preparing for college, Lucy gathering wildflowers just as she always had. The farmhouse no longer felt abandoned. It echoed with laughter, with music, with family, with second chances. Grace often thought back to the day she first stood before this forgotten house, believing she had reached the end of her story. She now understood something she wished everyone could know. Sometimes, the road that feels like the end is simply the path leading you home, and in the peaceful silence of the surrounding forest. It almost seemed as though Evelyn Harper was smiling too, not because her hidden truth had finally been uncovered, but because another family had discovered something even more valuable, a future built not on wealth, but on courage, compassion, and the unbreakable power of hope. Grace Bennett's journey reminds us that life can change in a single moment. One day, you may have a steady job, a comfortable home, and a clear plan for the future. The next, everything you worked so hard to build may disappear. Losing those things can make you believe you've failed. But the truth is, difficult seasons are not a measure of your worth. They are simply part of life's unexpected path. Grace discovered that real strength is not found in never falling. It is found in getting back up, one small step at a time, especially when others depend on you. She never became wealthy, powerful, or famous. Instead, she became something far more meaningful, a mother who refused to stop believing that tomorrow could be better than today. Evelyn Harper left behind more than hidden documents and legal evidence. She left behind a reminder that acts of courage and kindness can outlive a lifetime. The choices we make today may become someone else's hope many years from now. We may never know whose life will be changed because we chose honesty over fear, compassion over bitterness, or perseverance over surrender. For those watching this story, especially anyone who has experienced loss, retirement, illness, financial hardship, or loneliness, remember this. Your story is not over simply because life has become difficult. There is always another chapter waiting to be written. Sometimes the greatest blessings arrive disguised as painful endings. Sometimes the home you're searching for is waiting where you least expect it. And sometimes the greatest legacy we leave behind is not money or possessions, but the love we give, the people we help, and the hope we choose to pass on. No matter your age, as long as your heart still believes in tomorrow, a new beginning is always possible.